Supervisors often reward moderate rule breaking because they perceive it as a commitment to the team. But this preference reverses when the rule breaking becomes extreme enough to appear as a liability. Welcome back to This Week in Leadership Research, where I translate up-to-date research findings into practical insights you can use on a daily basis. This is episode 22. Today, I introduce a research article that challenges one of our most basic assumptions about organizational life, that rule breakers get punished. The article is titled, "A Bounded Preference for Rule Breakers." It was published in the Academy of Management Discoveries in 2025. Here is a setup. We assume that when employees break the rules, supervisors either punish them or at best tolerate them. But what if supervisors actually reward rule breakers? And what if this preferential treatment helps explain why rule breaking becomes so normalized in organizations, why it persists, and why scandals keep happening even in well-regulated industries? This study uses a data set from a professional ice hockey plus a controlled experiment to show that supervisors don't just tolerate rule breakers, they actively select them for more opportunities. But this preference has limits, and understanding those limits tells us something important about how organizational corruption takes root. Here is the career trajectory of Adeboli, a trader at a Swiss bank, UBS. As Adeboli's rule-breaking escalated, so did his rewards. He started unauthorized trading in 2008. By 2010, he was promoted to director. By 2011, his compensation had tripled. Late in 2011, the system finally caught up. His trading losses hit $2.3 billion, and he was arrested. But Adeboli's supervisors knew about the rule breaking, yet they promoted him and tripled his salary. It highlights a disconnect between what organizations say they value and what they actually reward. When the results of rule breaking look good, when someone is generating revenue or winning games, supervisors can interpret that rule breaking as a commitment, as doing whatever it takes. The question is Adeboli's story an outlier, or is it indicative of a broader pattern? Do supervisors systematically reward rule breakers? If so, under what conditions? To answer that question, the researchers turned to the National Hockey League. Here is what makes this context so valuable. First, rule breaking is observable and discrete. When a player trips an opponent or uses excessive force, a referee, who is an independent third party, immediately evaluates a penalty. The player is removed from the game for a set number of minutes. This creates a clear, objective record of rule breaking. Second, the data set is comprehensive. The researchers analyzed 6 seasons from 2012 to 2018, covering 213,850 player game observations. That's more than 200,000 data points tracking individual behavior, team performance, and coaching decisions. Third, the variables are precise. The violation is penalty minutes, a proxy for rule breaking. The reward is time on ice, the most valuable resource a coach allocates. The control is player skill, which isolate performance from behavior. Here is why this matters. In most organizational settings, rule breaking is hidden. Performance is hard to measure, and rewards are subjective. Managers can always claim they promoted someone for performance, not for bending the rules. But in hockey, everything is public, adjudicated, and recorded. If coaches reward rule breakers here, where the costs are immediate and visible, imagine what happens in contexts where rule breaking is easier to hide or rationalize. Let me be clear about what's at stake. When a hockey player commits a penalty, it imposes an immediate cost on the team. The penalized player is removed from the ice, leaving the team short-handed. the opposing team has a power play, a significant advantage that often leads to goals. Penalties reduce a team's chance of winning. So if coaches still reward rule breakers, it suggests they're valuing something else, something they perceive in that rule-breaking behavior that outweighs the immediate cost to the team performance. Now we get to the main result. The more penalties a player accrues, the more ice time they receive. Controlling for skill, controlling for performance, controlling for how the coach has worked with that player. Rule breaking predicts more playing time. This preference exists even though penalties act as a tax on winning. So coaches are rewarding behavior that statistically reduces their chances of success. That's striking. It's one thing to tolerate rule breaking when it's unclear whether it helps or hurts, but it's another to reward it when the data clearly show it's costly. Let me translate this to your context. Imagine you manage a team. An employee cuts corners on a compliance process to meet a deadline. The shortcut creates risk. Maybe it's a data privacy issue. Maybe it's a quality control problem. But the deadline is met, the client is happy, and the team looks good. What do? If you're like the coaches in this study, you may assign that employee to the next high-stakes project. Why? Because they got the job done. They showed commitment. They didn't let bureaucracy slow them down. But in doing so, you've just signaled to the entire team that rule breaking is the path to opportunity. Now, here is where it gets more interesting. The researchers didn't stop at this linear relationship. They tested whether this preference has limits. The preference for rule breakers increases up to a tipping point, which occurs around 9 penalty minutes over 5 games. This is roughly 1 minor penalty per game. Things like tripping, interference, and holding. After that tipping point, the preference reverses. For example, over 20 penalty minutes is associated with less playing time. Supervisors reward rule breaking, but not indiscriminately. There is a Goldilocks zone, not too little, not too much. Moderate rule breaking is optimal from the supervisor's perspective. Why? We'll get to the mechanism in a moment, but first, let's establish the boundaries more precisely because this effect does not hold everywhere and for everyone. The preference for the rule breakers is culturally contingent. In organizations or teams where rule following is the norm, breaking the rules does not signal commitment. It signals deviance. But in organizations where rule breaking is common, it signals you're one of us. You understand how the game is really played. Moreover, when teams are on a losing streak, for example, lost their past 5 games, coaches show a high preference for rule breakers. But when teams are on a winning streak, for example, past 5 games, that preference disappears. This connects to a well-established finding in behavioral economics. Loss aversion makes people risk-seeking. When you are losing, you are willing to take a bigger gamble. In this context, it means giving more playing time to aggressive rule-breaking players, hoping they'll spark a turnaround. What's more, the preference for rule breakings holds strongly in regular season games, but disappears entirely in playoff games. When the stakes are highest, coaches revert to selecting players based purely on performance and reliability, not rule breaking. Now we move from what to why. The researchers conducted an experiment to test the psychological mechanism. Here is how it worked. Participants were assigned to be advisors, overseeing a team of 4 players in a dice rolling game. The player's job was to roll a dice 5 times per round and report their results honestly. The team's goal was to outscore other teams. Unbeknownst to the advisor, all 4 players were simulated. 3 players reported statistically normal rolls, averaging about 3.5 per roll, which is what you'd expect from a fair die. But the 4th player was manipulated across 3 conditions. The honest player, who averaged 3.5, which is statistically probable. The moderate cheater, who averaged 5.0, implausible but not impossible. And the extreme cheater, who rolled all fives, which is statistically impossible. After 3 rounds, advisors were asked to select one player for bonus round. That player's score would be doubled and added to the team total. This setup isolates the effect of rule breaking from performance. The moderate cheater and extreme cheater contributed the same amount to the team score. The only difference was how egregiously they violated the rules. So what happened? Honest players were selected only 4% of the time. Moderate cheaters were selected 81% of the time. Extreme cheaters were selected 51% of the time. Let me say that again. The player who followed the rules had only 4% chance of being selected. The player who moderately broke the rules had an 81% chance, and that is not a small effect. That's a 20-fold difference. And even the extreme cheater, the player who rolled all fives, which is statistically impossible, was still selected more often than the honest player. Now, why? What were supervisors thinking when they made those selections? The researchers measured 2 competing perceptions. Perceived commitment is the belief that this player does whatever it takes. Perceived liability is the belief that this player will get us in trouble. For honest players, both perceptions are low. They are not seen as especially committed, but they are also not seen as a liability. For moderate rule breakers, perceived commitment is high, but perceived liability remains low. This is the sweet spot. Advisors see the rule breaking as evidence of commitment without yet seeing it as a threat. For extreme rule breakers, perceived commitment is still high, but perceived liability spikes. The more moderate the rule breaking, the more advisors perceived the player as committed, which increased their likelihood of being selected. But when rule breaking becomes extreme, perceptions of liability increase sharply, which decreased their likelihood of being selected. This means supervisors conduct a cost-benefit analysis, but they are weighing the cost and benefits asymmetrically. Moderate rule breaking signals commitment without triggering liability concerns. Extreme rule breaking triggers both, and the liability perception overwhelms the commitment perception. Now let's move to what you can do with this. Here is a circular process of how rule breaking gets normalized. It starts with one person breaking a rule. If that rule breaking produces a desirable outcome, the supervisor rewards it, maybe with a promotion, maybe with a high visibility project, maybe just with praise. That reward reinforces the rule breaking behavior. The rule breaker does it again. Other members observe this and start breaking rules too. Over time, rule breaking becomes the norm. And here is the insidious part. Leaders can claim they didn't encourage it. They didn't go out to tell anyone to break the rules. They just rewarded the people who got the results. But rewarding results that come from rule breaking is functionally the same as rewarding rule breaking. So how do you break this cycle? When you have discretion over who to promote or reward, you can always find a justification. You can tell yourself and others that you promoted someone for their results, their work ethic, their team spirit. But you don't have to acknowledge that you are rewarding rule breaking, and because commitment is subjective, you can perceive rule breaking as a commitment. The employee who skips the approval process to meet a deadline, they are showing initiative. The salesperson who bends compliance rules to close a deal, they are being resourceful. The manager who intimidates a vendor into better terms, they are tough negotiators. This is what the wiggle room problem is. Managerial discretion gives you room to rationalize. but because most organizations give managers wide latitude over employee treatment, especially treatment that is not tied to a formal process like promotion cycles, this wiggle room is everywhere. The solution is not to eliminate managerial discretion. Discretion is necessary for good management, but you need to make the criteria for rewards more explicit and more transparent. If your organization says it values integrity, then integrity needs to be a visible, measurable criterion in promotion decisions. If someone is getting promoted despite rule breaking, not because of performance, that needs to be named and justified, not hidden. To stop the next scandal, you can follow 3 actionable principles. First, scrutinize high performers on struggling teams. When someone is succeeding while the rest of the team struggles, ask how. Are they breaking rules? Are they hoarding information? Are they succeeding at others' expense? High performance in a low-performing team, it's a yellow flag. It's a yellow flag because it's something to be monitored rather than to be stopped immediately as how we treat a red flag. Second, doing whatever it takes cannot include violating core values. Commitment means persistence within ethical boundaries. Make this explicit. When you praise someone's work ethic, clarify they found a way to get it done without cutting corners. And third, align descriptive rewards with proscriptive rules. If your organization says it values integrity, then integrity must be rewarded as visibly as results. If someone follows a cumbersome process because it's the right thing to do, recognize that. If someone meets a deadline while also honoring compliance rules, celebrate that. The preference for rule breakers is a systematic pattern where organizations create incentives that reward the signal of commitment even when that signal comes from behavior that is costly or unethical. If you're a leader, I hope the research I introduced this week should make you pause and ask, who am I rewarding and what behaviors am I rewarding them for? Because the team is watching and what gets rewarded gets repeated.